Welcome, brave souls, to a journey into the unknown. Tonight, we bring you three chilling paranormal stories straight from Reddit. Real experiences from real people. Ghostly encounters, eerie whispers, and things that should not exist, yet they do. If you love the supernatural and spine-tingling tales, make sure to like this video and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Story 1. I see the ghost, darling. A few years ago, my wife and I went on a trip to Europe with another couple. One of the towns we stayed in for a couple of days was Firenze, Florence. The fair city of Firenze is a subject for multiple books, with its art, architecture, beauty, and history, so I will not get into that here. If you are fortunate enough to have been there, you will know what I'm talking about. You would also know that you cannot take a step in the city without being a stone's throw away from something historic. And all that history is bound to have its fair share of paranormal history attached. On our first night in the historic part of town, we stayed in one of the few modern hotels. This place had been completely built as a new structure, so there was nothing historic about it. But it did have a striking view of the Duomo. We could only stay there one night due to room availability, but the staff was kind enough to book us a room in a hotel that was a few streets away. We walked over to the place, and it was this charming chateau-looking building. I don't know what else to call its design, and it looked very, very old. Update. A reader corrected me and told me this design is called a palazzo. We could not check in yet, thus we asked the front desk to store our luggage so we could go sightseeing. While my friend was taking care of that, I walked around the lobby, which had an interesting display of art, items, and pictures from the hotel's history. A quick browse of the display, and I found out that the hotel had a rich history indeed. It had been the residence of a very wealthy family. Then it had been a convent, a hospital, an insane asylum, a hospital again, and now a hotel. I have seen enough horror films to know that this is the premise where you know bad stuff is going to happen and you tell the characters to turn around and leave. However, I shrugged it off and decided not to tell my wife, who freaks out about things like that. We had a wonderful day and evening. We retired to our room, which was nice, by the way, and promptly fell asleep. I woke up around dawn since I am a light sleeper and an early riser, and I could tell it was dawn because sunlight was trickling in from the edges of the window curtains. The room's window was at the very center of the wall, and from its left edge there were around 5 feet of wall until the wall met the corner, where a floor-to-ceiling dresser stood. My wife normally sleeps later than I do, so when I wake up, I stay in bed for a while thinking about the upcoming day in anything and everything, and that is when I saw her. At the corner of the wall between the window and the dresser, about a foot off the ground, there was a lady dressed all in white, floating in the air. She was not translucent, but she was not completely solid either. It is hard to describe her appearance. However, I could see her facial features. I could tell she had light hair and very fair skin. Her expression was truly kind and calming, with a warm, tender smile. There was no exchange of words, no movement or gestures, no telepathic messages. We remained there for a while just staring at each other. It is important to mention that at no point I felt threatened or scared. Freaked out, definitely. My wife began stirring in bed next to me and eventually put her arm across my chest and began making light, half-asleep conversation. I did not break eye contact with the entity at all and began smiling back at her, just one of those comfortable, sincere smiles. As my wife became more active, I said to her, "Don't look, but there is a woman in our room. She is floating. I think she is a ghost." My wife opened her eyes wide, all the mind fogginess running from her head. She stared at me for a few seconds, and then, out of the corner of my eye, I could tell that she shut her eyes in an "I don't want to look" way. A few moments after that, the lady moved backwards and faded into the wall. She did not say goodbye or change her expression. She just left. I told my wife she could look now, but she did not want to. I could tell she was praying. We went down for breakfast and told our friends the story, which they, of course, did not believe. I went to the front desk and told the person there what I had seen, and she asked me if I wanted to fill out a form about it. Apparently it was not uncommon, but the experiences and the guests' reactions were very wide-ranging, and they had figured over the years that most guests just wanted someone to listen to them. So they instituted the form so people would not talk about the encounters around other guests and just write them down. I chose not to write anything. To this day, I clearly remember the fondness of the smile of the Lady of Firenze. I would like to thank her for reaching out to me and being so kind. Story 2. It was watching for me. Memory is a fickle thing. It bends, warps, and reshapes itself over time. I know this. I remind myself of it often. But there are some memories so sharp, so visceral, that no amount of time can dull them. Some things are burned into the mind like scars on flesh. This is one of those memories. I was 7, maybe 8, when it happened. It was late afternoon or early evening, the kind of time where the sky outside is a deep blue, just starting to slip into night, but there's still enough light to see clearly without a lamp. I was in my bedroom, kneeling beside my bed, completely lost in my own little world. The room was my safe space, a haven of dolls, stuffed animals, and well-worn storybooks. I had a single bed, the kind raised high enough that my sister and I could crawl underneath to hide, a small cave of childhood imagination. That night I was playing, setting up a careful scene between my Bratz dolls and Beanie Babies, arranging them in some miniature drama that seemed of utmost importance at the time. The carpet beneath me was soft and worn, familiar under my fingers as I adjusted each figure to my liking. I remember feeling peaceful, absorbed. Then something changed. It started subtly, the way an atmosphere shifts before a storm. The room felt different, heavier. The air itself seemed to press down on me, thick and suffocating. I became aware of an unnatural silence, not just the absence of noise, but the presence of something else, something watching. Then I felt it, something cold and unseen wrapped around my ankles. Before I could scream, before I could even react, I was yanked violently off my feet. The world flipped, and I barely had time to register the impact as my body hit the floor with a dull thud. Carpet burned against my skin, my hands scrambled for purchase, but it didn't matter. I was dragged under the bed, and suddenly everything was gone. I don't mean I was simply under the bed. No, I wasn't in my room anymore. I wasn't anywhere. It was like I had fallen off the edge of the world into an abyss, a space so utterly black, so devoid of light or life, that it felt endless. The floor, the walls, even my own body ceased to exist. There was only that impossible darkness, a vast yawning void. I should have been able to see the slats of my bed, the dusty carpet underneath, maybe even the soft glow of the hallway light peeking in from under the door. But there was nothing, just cold, endless nothing. And yet, something was there with me. I could feel it, an immense presence, ancient and unknowable. It didn't breathe, didn't move, but I could sense it watching, its gaze like a physical weight pressing against my skin. My heart pounded, my body frozen in place, trapped in that abyss. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Then, as suddenly as it had happened, I was back. I was standing in the middle of my bedroom, my lungs gasping for air, my hands clenched into trembling fists, and I was already speaking. "That wasn't funny, Dad," I was shouting, my voice shaking with panic and anger. Pulling me under the bed wasn't funny. I didn't even remember climbing out from under the bed. I didn't remember crawling back into the light. It was as if I had simply woken up mid-sentence, as if my mind had been dropped into this moment with no transition. And then I saw my dad. He stood in the doorway, his face twisted in confusion and concern, his brows furrowed, his mouth slightly open as if he wasn't sure what to say. "What the hell are you talking about?" he asked. I blinked. My breath hitched. "You pulled me under the bed," I said, the words feeling weak, uncertain now that I heard them out loud. You grabbed me. You dragged me under." His expression darkened. "No, I didn't," he said firmly. "I was downstairs. I heard you screaming, so I ran up here." Something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. There was no humor in his voice, no teasing. And my dad, who would jump out from behind doors to scare us, who would lift us up by our ankles just to hear us shriek with laughter, looked truly disturbed. He hadn't done it, but something had. I don't remember what happened next. I think my mom let me sleep in her bed that night, but honestly, the rest of the evening is a blur. What I do remember is that I never played on the floor of my bedroom again. I never let my feet dangle off the bed at night, and I never, not once, looked under my bed in the dark. Even now, all these years later, I still get a sick, creeping feeling when I think about it. Because the thing that haunts me most isn't just that I was pulled under, it's that for those few moments, I wasn't in my room anymore. And I don't know where I was. I don't know what pulled me into the dark. And worst of all, I don't think it was the last time it tried. Story 3. It looked like my mom. I've had countless paranormal and spiritual experiences as a child, but this one has always stuck with me. 13 years ago, when I was around 6 or 7 years old, my mom, older sister, our little puppy and I were living in my mom's boyfriend's apartment. The apartment had 3 rooms. The room on the far left was my sister's and mine. The room on the far right belonged to my mom and her boyfriend. And the one room in the middle we called the middle room. We were told not to go into the middle room because it was BF's mom room. I still remember her. She was very tall and slender, standing at least 6 feet tall. She looked to be in her 70s with gray, kinky hair. We didn't see her leave the middle room much, but when she did, she would play games with my sister and me. At first it was fun, and my older sister seemed to love her, but then I would get a dreadful, uncomfortable feeling around her, so I tried to avoid her as much. I think she noticed because she started treating me differently, pinching me when no one was looking, pulling my hair, and scratching me. Whenever I told my mom, she wouldn't believe me, or would brush it off. To be honest, my mom wasn't the greatest parent. Even our little German Shepherd puppy didn't like her. He would bark and growl at her every time she came out of the room. My mom's boyfriend hated the barking and would argue with my mom about it. The fights got so bad that he eventually said either the dog goes or we all go. My mom gave the dog away. I remember my sister and me crying as we said goodbye to Shiloh. One day we didn't see the old lady at all. I asked my sister where she was, and she just shrugged and said, "Maybe she doesn't feel like playing today," then went back to playing leapfrog. I was happy not to see her that day. That night, everyone went to bed as usual, but I woke up in the middle of the night because I needed to use the bathroom. The bathroom was right in front of the middle room, so I couldn't avoid passing by it. As I walked toward the bathroom, I noticed the door to the middle room was slightly ajar, with light spilling out into the hallway. I got that bad feeling again, but I still wanted to see what was inside. I peeked through the gap in the door, and what I saw will stay with me forever. The old lady was there, but her back was turned to me. She was twitching in a strange, unnatural way, and her skin was gray, like a corpse. She smelt terrible, like rotting flesh. I just stood there, frozen. Suddenly, she turned her head toward me, her eyes completely black. Her face looked gray, like it was decaying. I cried and ran back to my room, diving under the covers and praying she wouldn't come to the door. Thankfully, she didn't. I didn't sleep much that night, but eventually I dozed off when the sun came. When I woke up, my sister wasn't in the room, so I cautiously walked out, still terrified. I found everyone sitting in the kitchen eating breakfast, but the old lady wasn't there. I ran to my mom and told her everything I had seen. My mom's boyfriend gave her a look, and my mom looked angry and said, "Tira, fake name, what are you talking about?" I started crying and pointed to her boyfriend and said, "Your mom." My mom popped me on the arm and yelled at me to apologize. I cried and threw a tantrum because they didn't believe me. Every time I explained it all over again, my mom's BF would get madder and madder, and finally he stood up, took me by the arm, and dragged me to the middle room and opened the door. The room was empty. There was old clothes, old jewelry, and old purses that looked to belong to an old lady. The room smelled of dust, like no one has been in it for a long time. He dragged me further into the room and pointed to a picture on top of the dresser. In the picture, it was the BF's mom, but she looked younger. Her hair was black, she had an afro, and she was smiling. He said, "Look here, that's my mom. She died 15 years ago." I was so shocked and scared and started crying even more. So I was sent back to my room and put in timeout. No matter how many times I told the story, no one ever believed me. The nightmares started soon after. Almost every night I'd dream of her standing at the edge of my bed, laughing at me. Eventually, my mom and her boyfriend had a massive argument and broke up. We moved out and went to live with my grandma. Years later, when I was 11 and my sister was 13, I asked her if she remembered the old lady, our mom's ex-BF's mom. To my surprise, she said she'd never seen an old lady back then. She admitted she only played along because she figured she was my imaginary friend. I did daydream a lot as a kid. Still, even now at 19, I know what I saw. And to this day, no one believes me. I hope you like this Reddit stories. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and also you can write your stories in comments. I'd like to check it all. Bye-bye.